This is section 6.1. This is really part 2 of section 6.1. Part 1 we talked about all the exponent rules and all that. Now we're going to talk about roots and radical expressions, and this is part 2. We're going to talk about the first half of this today, and then the second half you're going to do tonight at home. As we look at this here, our objective here is to find nth roots. Okay, and we talk about a root, nth roots, all that kind of stuff. We're going to talk about exactly what all that stuff is here. Okay, so a couple things as we're going to go here. If a to the n equals b, so you'll notice we have an exponent n, and that's really the key part here. With a and b to be real numbers, n's a positive integer, then a is the nth root of b. Essentially, we're going backwards here. Okay, so if we have a to the n power equals b, what do I do to b to figure out a? Well, I'm going to take the root of that. Okay, just very similar to using square root, except for now it's not just going to be square roots all the time. Okay, a couple of things here. If the n is odd, if n's an odd number, so if the exponent's an odd number, essentially, there's one real nth root of b. Okay, there's one answer. All right, now we're not going to have to deal with a lot of two-answer type questions here. We're going to just say that everything is we're going to assume that every variable is positive, so we don't have to do a lot of this stuff. Okay, but in this case, if n is even, if the root or the exponent is even, okay, and b is positive, there's two real nth roots of b. Okay, if b is negative, there are no real nth roots of b, and we're going to get into that part of things. Okay, so if you have an even root and there's a negative underneath of it, it's not possible to have that because you can't get a negative number with an even root. Okay, so you're going to use the radical sign to indicate a root. The number underneath the radical sign is called the radicand. That's the a value here. The index gives the degree. Okay, that's the biggest key. That's where the nth root. That's what we're talking about. Nth root here. Most of the time you've seen this so far as it being a 2. So we've taken the square root. Well, now it could be a 3, it could be a 4, it could be a 10, it could be anything right now. Okay, and then you also have the obvious. This is the radical sign. So this information right here is not particularly new. You've seen it before in problems. Okay, so the directions to find your roots. All right, so the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to break down the number underneath the radical, or the radicand. You're going to break down the radicand to match the index. So you want to ask yourself, essentially, when you're breaking this down, you want to match a power, which you would have here, to the index. Okay? And a lot of times you'll hear me say, what to the third power is 81, in those kind of instances. Okay, so in this case, what you're going to ask yourself here is, what to the nth power is not 8, but it is a. Okay, and you'll see as I go through these, you'll hear me ask that question. What to the nth power is a? Okay. For example, just real quick, if I have the cube root of 8, okay, so I'm going to ask, what to the third power is 8? Well, that happens to be a 2, so 2 to the third power. So you always want your power and your index to either be divisible by each other or at least be the same thing. If they're the same thing, you're going to find out it's going to be really easy to do. Okay, if they're divisible by each other, it's also going to be fairly easy to do. But that's the kind of where I'm going on this. Okay, another important part: you cannot take the root of a negative number to an even index. So if let's say a happens to be negative 6. And I want to take the fourth root of negative 6. If this number right here is positive, this number can never be negative. Ever. Okay? That's why I have that in capital letters. You're going to use the exponent chart. And you'll see a picture of the exponent chart on here. You're going to get one of these as well. Okay, and you're going to be able to use that to break down your numbers. You're not going to have to memorize what these exponents are, what these powers are. Anytime you just have a root, remember the index is 2. They're not going to write that in there for you. Okay, if all I have is just a square root, for example, if all I have is this, if all I have is a square root, there is a 2 here. They don't write it. Okay, it's just like a 1 in front of a variable. Okay, now let's take a look at a couple of examples on the next page. All right, so we've got what is each real number root. Okay, and you'll notice down here, I've got this is the chart you're going to get, the exponent chart. I put a picture of it on here so that we can look at it and we can kind of break down here on these. Okay, now the first one is we've got the cube root of negative 27 right here. Okay, so again, the question that I want to ask myself, what to the third power is 27? So I'm going to go on my chart and I'm going to look for the number 27, which happens to be here. Okay, as you can see, 27, this is 3 to the third power is 27. So 3 to the third power is 27. So I'm going to break that down. I'm going to say this is the cube root of, in this case, it's negative 3 because the number is negative to the third power. Okay, now what you're going to notice here is that whenever you have this, you are going to divide the exponent with the index. So essentially, the two 3's, the index and the exponent, 3 divided by 3 is 1. Essentially, they're just going to cancel each other out. No different than if you had a square root and a square. Okay, so if those cancel each other out, all I'm left with here is negative 3. So the cube root of negative 27 is negative 3. Okay. All right, the fourth root of negative 81. Okay, so I got to figure out what to the fourth power is negative 81. Now, a couple things that we looked at here. Okay, remember what we said. We said we cannot take an even index and a negative number. So in this case, I can't do this one. Can't do that guy. Okay, you have an even index and a negative number. You can't do that. Okay, it's not possible for you to be able to do that. All right, so next one. We've got the square root of negative 7 to the second power. Okay, now you'll notice here they've already broke this one down for you, but we also have an even root, because remember this is a 2. Okay, an even root and a negative number, but the negative number is squared. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify this a little bit here. Okay, so I'm going to make this the square root. Negative 7 squared is 49. And then I'm going to break it down because now I've eliminated my negative in there. Okay, so really this is the square root of 7 to the second. And my 2 divided by 2 is 1. They cancel out. And my final answer here is a 7. Okay. All right, we've got the square root, again, a 2 there, of negative 49. Again, I've got a negative number and an even root. You can't do this. Okay, a couple more examples here as we look through. Okay, so what's the real number root for each one of these? Again, negative 8, the cube root of negative 8. So as I look at the chart here, I'm looking for 8. What to the third power is 8? Well, in this case, it's 2 to the third power. So this is really the cube root of negative 2 to the third. Now, we don't care if this is odd and that's negative. That doesn't matter. That's okay. Okay? It just can't be even. So my 3's cancel each other out, and I'm left with a negative 2. Cube root of negative 8 is negative 2. All right, the decimal ones. Now, you'll notice the decimal ones aren't on your chart. But as you look at this, you'll see the number 4, okay? And as you look at, you see the number 4 here, all right? So you see 4, you want to figure out something to the second power is 4. Well, it's going to be 2, but as you look at this, again, you always want to eliminate, in this case, 0.04 is really 0.2 squared. So this is really the square root of 0.2 2, or 0.2 squared. And my 2's, 2 divided by 2 is 1. They go away, and I'm left with 0.2 as my answer. Okay? C, the fourth root of negative 1. Big alert here. You got an even root. You have a negative number. Sorry, can't do this guy. Okay? And the last one down here. Again, I've got the square root of negative 2 squared. I'm going to go ahead, since it's a negative of an even index, since I have a square in there, I'm just going to make this the square root of 4, which is really the square root of 2 squared. My 2's cancel, and I'm left with a big 2. Okay? All right, so this concludes part 1. We only have done numbers here. Okay? This evening you'll do... We'll add in variables as well, and you'll see that the variables are actually fairly simple because we assume that they're all positive, so it's not too horribly complicated. Okay? All right, this concludes section 6.1, part 2. And take a look at today in class, the example problems I've given you and your practice problems.